Adding authentication and authorization to your JavaScript and TypeScript apps should be easy. There should be no headaches. It should be customizable. You should be in control of the data, the user data. It should be free. You shouldn't have to pay anything for it. And with Better Auth, I have gotten that exact experience. So throughout my years of building out applications with JavaScript and TypeScript, I've implemented auth in a lot of different ways. In the early days, I was using Passport.js. I've also rolled my own auth using various packages from NPM for like hashing and creating JSON web tokens, but kind of assembling them together into my own system. I've also used NextAuth and Auth.js and Lucia Auth. And I've also used third-party services that store the users in their own system and handle things like password resets and email verification. So I've used services like Auth0 and Firebase Auth and Clerk. And throughout all of that, Better Auth has been the best. It's in the name. But it's been the easiest to integrate, easiest to customize. It's free, it's open source, it works in your own app. And in this video, I'm going to tell you 8 reasons why I like Better Auth and why you should maybe give it a try. If that sounds good to you, let's dive in. My name is CJ. Welcome to Syntax. First reason to use Better Auth is they support almost every single full stack framework and backend framework in the JavaScript ecosystem. So in their docs, you can see they support Astro, Remix, Next, Nux, SvelteKit, SolidStart, TanStack Start. And then for just API backends, things like Hono and Fastify and Express and Alicia and Nitro and Nest.js. And even they support Expo for like React Native. So I've used it with Next.js, Nuxt, and Hono. Scott has used it with SvelteKit, and in my experience, it's almost exactly the same to set up for every one of these. The only thing that's different is how you set up those API endpoints depending on which framework you're integrating with. But the nice thing is, I only had to learn Better Auth once, and then it's just a matter of going to the framework page to see how things are slightly different to integrate with that specific framework. So for example, with Next.js, you create a catch-all handler that just exports the to Next.js handler, and now you've got all those auth endpoints set up. For Nuxt, very similar thing. You create a catch-all handler. For Hono, very similar. You just create a wildcard handler that defers to Better Auth. Now, in terms of client-side integration, it's just as easy. So if you have a React front end, there is a specific create auth client that works with React. There's one that works with Vue, Svelte, Solid, and then of course Vanilla.js if you don't want to use the framework-specific client adapters. And on top of that, for front-end frameworks, they also expose hooks that you can use. So for React, there's a use session hook. Same thing for Vue, Svelte, and Solid. So if you've used any other auth framework before, you'll feel right at home. Essentially, they have the stuff you need for the backend. They have the stuff you need for the front end. On top of that, they support pretty much every database you might be using. So MySQL, SQLite, Postgres, Microsoft SQL, other relational databases, and they also have adapters for Drizzle and Prisma. So you're pretty much covered if you're using any one of these, as well as MongoDB. And if that doesn't cover you, then there's also community adapters. So you can see people have built adapters for Convex and things like Payload. And of course, if your database isn't here, you could create your own database adapter. So no matter the backend tech or front-end tech or database that you're using, Better Auth has you covered. The next thing I like about Better Auth is they support email and password out of the box, as well as any number of social providers that you might want to add. Now, a lot of other do-it-yourself auth frameworks kind of discourage email and password, but sometimes that's really the kind of auth that you want in your app. Now, of course, if you're allowing users to sign up with their email, you want to verify that they actually are in control of that email. Now, out of the box, there is no verification, but it's very simple to enable. So right here inside of your Better Auth config, you can just have an email verification key and set the send verification email. And this method can do literally whatever you want. You can talk to an SMTP server, you can just log the URL to the console. It's up to you, but the main idea is this token is what's used by the Better Auth SDK to actually verify that user's email in the database, but you can do literally whatever you want inside of that function. So I'll show you how I set this up with Next.js. So I have this example Next.js app where users can sign up and manage all of the buzzwords for their company. They can create organizations, invite members to the teams, all enabled via Better Auth plugins. So for example, if I want to sign up as a new user, I can enter in all my info, click sign up, and you'll see with the way that I've integrated this, I show the user a confirmation that says, check your email because we sent you a verification link. Now for local development, I'm just using Ethereal Email, which if you haven't heard of is pretty slick. Essentially, it just gives you a temporary username and password, and any emails that get sent via that username and password show up on this website, ethereal.email. So this just sent an email to test@example.com, but it didn't really go there. It just went to my dashboard here. And then we have the link we can click to actually verify our email address. So we do this, And once we're verified, we're instantly logged in to the dashboard. So Better Auth doesn't tie you to any specific email provider or anything like that. For my app, I'm just using the NPM package called NodeMailer, and this lets you talk to any SMTP server. Inside this function is where the real work happens. So I've got this method called send verification email. Essentially, I render out an email. So I'm using a package called React Email. And this just lets you use JSX to construct what the email should be. But whenever you render it out, it actually converts it into HTML that's going to work across a lot of different email clients. But that creates the HTML that's going to be sent. We also have plain text in case the user is reading this email via plain text. And then my send email function creates a transporter. And this is something provided by NodeMailer. So NodeMailer is a package that lets you talk to SMTP servers. And here you can see I pass in my SMTP credentials. So like I mentioned, when I'm running locally, we're just using ethereal email. But whenever I'm in production, we could talk to an SMTP server that's provided by Resend or AWS SES or any other number of email providers. But essentially, this just sends that email. But the key point being the verification URL is in that email. And so after we've created that transporter, we can just use the sendmail method, pass in all of our stuffs. We're good to go. One extra thing I like to do when I'm working in development is use this get test message URL provided by NodeMailer. So ethereal email is a service that is associated with NodeMailer, and this actually is what allows me to have that preview URL that I can just click on and instantly see the email. So when I'm testing locally, I can just click on that link pretty easily. But like I mentioned, you can do literally whatever you want inside of this function. The main idea here is the token, which is actually embedded in the URL, is what's used by the Better Auth library to actually mark a user's email as verified. Now, another thing you likely want to do if you're having users log in with email and password is also be able to reset their password. And the setup for that is almost exactly the same. There's just this method called send reset password, and we can do whatever we want inside of there. So essentially, we send an email, but instead of having a verification link, it's a reset password link. So it takes the user to the reset password page. There's lots of other options you can pass in for email and password, but in my experience, this has been fantastic. I'm in control of all the users. They all live in my database next to the rest of my data, but we still have all the perks of what some of these hosted email providers give us, like email verification and reset password and all that good stuff. Now, for my app, verification links were perfectly fine, but some people don't like verification links because pretty often you might be like logging in on mobile and then you have to go to your email client to get the link and there's like a bunch of hopping around. One thing you could do instead is use their one-time password plugin. It works almost exactly the same. Essentially, once you've installed the plugin, you now have this send verification OTP, and instead of a token, you now have an OTP. And from there, you can do the same thing. So instead of sending an email that has a link inside of it, you could send an email that has like a 6-digit code. And then from there, you could implement a page where if the user enters in that OTP code, that talks to the Better Auth SDK and then verifies the user within your database. So tons of freedom here in terms of how you verify users. And beyond that, if you don't want to use passwords at all, they also have the Magic Link plugin. It works exactly the same way. You specify this callback here where you get the user's email, that token in the URL, and then you do whatever you want. And the code would look almost exactly the same where we send that email, but instead of saying click this to verify, let's say click this to log in. So in my experience, integrating email with Better Auth has been super smooth, and this is really one of the reasons why I love it. Now, you might have thought that you needed some hosted or third-party provider to provide this kind of flow for your users, but as long as you have access to some SMTP server, some server that can send emails, Better Auth lets you integrate very easily, and you stay in control of all the data. So all the users still live in your database. If you're running locally, you don't have to worry about talking to a third-party API to get access to those users. So for all of the apps that I've been working on with Better Auth, it's made that super easy. Next thing, some of you are going to maybe get a little bit scared at, but you can actually enable bearer token authentication. Now, a lot of other auth frameworks in the JavaScript ecosystem essentially force you to use session cookies, but there are scenarios where session cookies will not work, especially if you have like a separate backend hosted on a different domain from your front end. Cross-domain cookies might not work for that scenario. You might also be building out an API where you want any client to be able to talk to it. And for those scenarios, cookies will not work. But if you want to use bearer authentication, Better Auth has a plugin and it just works out of the box. So you add the bearer plugin, and then inside of your client-side codes, there's an onSuccess callback, and you can store that JSON web token in local storage or session storage if you want to be a little bit more secure, and later on use that token when needed. So Better Auth allows you to set up some fetch options whenever you're setting up the auth client. And inside of here, you can see anytime a fetch is happening through their SDK, it's going to automatically grab that token from local storage. So you may not like this, but for me, this was absolutely awesome to see because, like I said, I've used other auth frameworks where this was essentially impossible or needed a ton of customization to get working. But if you need this, this plugin will work for you. And they even provide this disclaimer here because by default, it is using session cookies. But if you're putting tokens in local storage or session storage, you better understand the ramifications of that. But I do. And so for some apps, that is the way that I like to implement auth. The next thing I like about Better Auth is how customizable it is without needing to read through their source code or create any sort of like weird overrides or anything like that. Their entire auth system is based on hooks, and there are before hooks and after hooks. And inside of these hooks, you can basically do anything. You can detect if a user is signing up, if a user is logging in, if a user is resetting their password, if the session's getting created. You can do absolutely anything to modify what's happening before or after any one of these auth events is happening. Now, in this simple example here, they only allow users to sign up that have an email that ends with a specific domain. So this is perfect if you're building internal tools and you essentially want to restrict what users can sign up, but you do want to enable sign up because maybe you're not automatically creating a bunch of accounts for every user in your organization. This is a simple little hook that detects if the incoming body has an email, that means we're either like signing up or logging in. And if that email doesn't end with a specific domain, we're going to throw an error. So this is a fairly simple hook, but let's take a look at some of the hooks that I've implemented to see how custom this stuff gets. Now, this is an example that I implemented in a Nuxt application that I was working on. And essentially this had to do with server-side rendering and also hydration errors. So one of the things about Nuxt is if an API endpoint returns anything that is not undefined, it will attempt to validate the client-side hydration. And the issue was when I was working on this app, Better Auth actually returned null whenever a request came into /get session. And according to Nuxt, null is not undefined, so I was getting hydration errors. And so to fix this, I just wrote a simple little after hook where if a request was retrieving the session, if that session did not exist, instead of the default behavior of returning null, I returned an object where session was null and user was null. And this worked for my needs. Now, the Nuxt integration has since fixed that. Instead of returning null, they now return undefined. But I didn't have to wait for Better Auth to release a new version or for people to decide on what was the best way to handle this. I could just add this hook, and now I was no longer getting hydration errors, and I customized all my code to handle the session being null and user being null instead of the overall object being null. Another example of a hook that I wrote is for this Next.js app for resetting passwords. So let's sign out for this test user and let's try resetting their password. So we can send the reset link. All of that's using the Better Auth integration. And if we check our console, we should get access to that reset link. Here it is. But one of the user experiences I really like is when a user resets their password, they should just be automatically logged in. I don't want them to have to go back to the sign in page and enter in their new password. We already know what their password is because they just reset it. So I set my app up so that once a user resets their password, it instantly logs them in and takes them to the dashboard. So no need to go back to the sign in page and manually enter in all that information. Now, this isn't supported out of the box, but I wrote some hooks to do this. So essentially, I have a before hook that detects if a request is coming in to reset password. And if it is, I then grab the verification out of the database. And for that specific verification token, I attach the email to the body that's returned by Better Auth, because by default, that email is not included. And so essentially, once a user arrives on that forgot password page, we don't know who they are. We just have the verification token. So this before hook includes the email in the response. So if it was a valid reset password token, this email is going to get included. And of course, if that verification token didn't exist, it would just use the default response, which would likely be like token not found or whatever else. So the before hook essentially attaches the email associated with that verification token. And then the after hook says, if this was a valid reset, we actually attach the email there as well. And so this is all I needed. And my front end code now had access to the email. It had access to the user's reset password because they literally just typed it in. And so essentially on the front end, after a reset password is successful, that makes a request to sign in with their latest password, and then the original logic of redirecting to the dashboard after login kicks in. So as you can see, very customizable. And again, this is just something I wanted for my app. You might think of other scenarios where you might want to modify the response or do something custom. You can do that with before and after hooks. Now, another set of hooks you can tap into that let you customize the behavior of Better Auth are database hooks. So hooks at the top level are all about the incoming and outgoing requests for the Better Auth API, but database hooks allow you to tap into when things are happening with a user, a session, or an account. So just like with the other hooks, there's before hooks and after hooks for before a user is created or after a user is created. And in the before hooks, you can basically customize the data before it gets inserted into your database. So this is really great if you want to maybe attach some extra properties, maybe you want to make some API calls and put some stuff associated with that user when the user gets created and put into the database. For my example, I wanted to make it so that the first user that signs up on my website automatically becomes an administrator. And this is something you typically do for apps you're building that people like to self-host. So when they self-host, the first user that signs in instantly becomes the admin user. And this is a simple little before create hook. And so for this, we just reach into the database, count how many users there are. And if there are no users, before that user is getting created, we set their role to admin because otherwise their role would have been set to member. In a second, I'm going to talk about the admin plugin so you can see where all of this is coming from. But again, this is just custom logic. You can customize this to your heart's content. Essentially change what the data would be that gets inserted into the database before it gets inserted. And again, this was so easy to customize. I've used other auth frameworks, and a lot of times you have to create like a custom database adapter, or you have to do a hack where you're like modifying the database adapter functions directly. With these before and after hooks, it's super simple to just customize the behavior of what happens as Better Auth is talking to your database. And that leads me to the next thing I like about Better Auth is the admin plugin. So this essentially gives you everything you would need to administer all of the users within your system. It's a built-in plugin. You just pass it to the plugins array on the backend Better Auth instance, and then also on the front end Better Auth client. And with that, you now have all the functions you would need to administer the users within your system. So you've got create user, list user, set roles, set password, ban user, unban user, list sessions, etc. And one of the things I really like, which you often need to do when you're working in a support role or you're trying to figure out what's going on with various users in your system, they also have a built-in way of impersonating users. So you can essentially just pass in any user ID, and then that admin, which is already logged in, becomes that user. So they can navigate around as if they were logged in as that user. And this is awesome because the admin doesn't need to know those users' passwords or anything like that. So this is really great for site admins to be able to debug and basically pretend to be some other user to see what they're seeing within their dashboard. And on top of that, there is access control. So by default, every user that gets created has the user role, and then any user that has the admin role is going to be able to perform all of these admin functions like listing and deleting and updating users and impersonating users. And along with roles, they also have permissions, and permissions are resource based. And out of the box, there is the user resource and then all of the permissions associated with that user resource. So an admin has the ability to create users, list users, set roles on users, ban, impersonate, etc. So it can perform all of these actions on the user resource. And an admin can also list, revoke, or delete sessions within the system. So that's the built-in permission system, but you can create more permissions on top of that. So in the example they have here, they're creating a resource called project. So let's say your app allows users to CRUD projects. You can define your resource name, we'll call it project, and then all of the actions that can be performed on it. And then from there, you create your roles and then assign the various permissions for those given resources. So in this case, we have a custom user role where users can create projects. But our admin role has the ability to update projects, but users cannot update projects. And then you could come up with a custom role like, let's say like project manager or something like that. And then they might have all of the permissions to perform on that specific resource. And in their example here, they're also giving that project manager the ability to ban users from the user resource. So it's highly customizable. I haven't played around with the customizations here just yet, but what's great about this is once you have all of these roles and permissions set up, they have a built-in way of checking, does an authenticated user have a specific permission? So this is something you might put in a middleware, or you might put this code right before you're modifying or talking to your database. And you can check to see, does the current user have the permission to create a project? Or instead of passing in the user's ID, you can pass in the role of that given user. So this makes it really easy to integrate with your existing API routes. You could essentially just add this admin plugin, set up your roles and permissions, and then any API route you have, you would just add this at the top of that API route to check the permissions for the incoming request for the logged in user. So the admin plugin is fantastic. I did a simple little demo here in my Next.js app. I've just created a simple admin dashboard. I actually haven't implemented all of these different pages, but for now on the manage users page, you can just remove a user. And in the source codes, I'm literally just using the remove user method that's provided by Better Auth. But we could add buttons that integrate with all of the other types of things that we can do with users, like ban them or set their roles or whatever else. And all of that can be handled in my custom dashboard here. The next thing I really like about Better Auth is they have a built-in organization plugin. And so this essentially allows you to have organizations that have teams, and then teams can have members. And then within an organization, you can have various roles like the admin of an organization, an owner, a member, and all of that is built in out of the box. And so after you've enabled the plugin, you'll have the ability to create, read, update, delete organizations. So on the client side, you can do client.organization.create. And on the server side, you'll do auth.api.create organization or list organizations. And from there, you can start integrating it into your app. And on top of that, they support invitations for being added to an organization. So I'm going to sound like a broken record, but basically this send invitation email method is exactly the same as when we're doing our one-time passwords or our verification links. Essentially just send the email somewhere using something. But you get access to the invite link, which is essentially a unique token for a user to be added to that organization. So in my app here, you can see we have the syntax organization. And then within the syntax organization, right now we only have one member, and we do have a list of buzzwords. But if I head into manage members, I can now invite a new member to my organization. So I'm going to invite Wes. I'm going to make them just a member. They can't change the organization, but they'll be able to see our list of buzzwords. And then I'll send that invite. So now Wes shows up as a pending member. And now Wes will need to sign up on the site and then accept that invitation. So I'm Wes Boss now. I'm going to go sign up with this email, and then I'll be able to click to be added to that organization. Okay, so Wes is here. He's logged in. You'll see that he doesn't have any organizations listed. But if he heads back to his email and clicks that join organization email, you'll see it has all the details. So we're joining the syntax organization, invited by CJ, and you're going to become a member. So when we clicked accept invite, that'll then show a confirmation. We'll say, yes, accept that invitation. And now Wes is a member of the syntax organization. And you can see because Wes is not the owner, he doesn't have the ability to manage the organization settings or anything like that. And he doesn't have the ability to create new lists of buzzwords, but he can view the existing list of buzzwords that was created by me within the system. But if we log out of Wes's account and log in as me, you'll notice that I do have the ability to perform all of those actions, and I have the ability to manage users within my organization. So we head in, we'll see we have the syntax org. We can see that Wes has accepted that invite and they've joined the organization. But if we head back to our lists of buzzwords, you'll see that because I'm an owner of this organization, I have the ability to manage these lists of buzzwords. So I can add or remove or update lists within here, whereas Wes is just a member of the organization. So all of that is enabled via the organization's plugin. And beyond that, you have even finer grained control. So just like with the admin plugin, you have roles and permissions. The roles that get added whenever you enable this plugin are the owner of an organization, admin, and member. And then you have specific resources like the organization itself, the member resource, the invitation resource, and then all of the various permissions for those given resources. But just like the admin plugin, you can set up custom permissions. So I can have a buzzword list resource, and from there I can specify the operations that can be performed on a buzzword list. And then I can set up my access control list and say that a member can only read the buzzword list, but the admin and the owner can create, update, or delete the buzzword list. So it's highly customizable. You can create new roles, new permissions, and then add whatever specific resources you have within your application that are beyond organizations and users. essentially anything that you're reading or updating or deleting, you can add as a custom key here inside of these roles that you define. And so this plugin is awesome for doing things like multi-tenant apps, or really just setting up your app in a way where things are restricted based on various teams and organizations. And once you have this plugin enabled and all of the database tables created, every organization has an organization ID. And so essentially from there, it's up to you to customize where you put this. And you'll see that in my database, a buzzword list has an organization ID. So I have my own checks internally to also make sure that when this gets created, it belongs to an organization, and from there, no other organization is able to view this specific list. The last thing or things I like about Better Auth is all the plugins that are available to you. And one of them that a lot of people might want to use, especially if you're building like software as a service, they have a Stripe plugin. So you can essentially add customer management, subscription management, and all of that automatically integrates back to Stripe via webhooks. And so once you've added this plugin, you can start integrating it into your app and then locking some things behind various subscriptions. One example of that is the organization plugin. So if you've enabled both of these plugins, now you can use this method on organizations called allow user to create organization, and then lock it down to only allow them to create it if they have a specific subscription plan. And once you've set up Stripe, you'll see that under subscription management, you can basically set up what plans you have available. And this ties back to your Stripe dashboard. So like the basic plan or the pro plan. And then in here, you can check it by plan name. So this allows you to start monetizing your app. So you can maybe limit the number of users that are created for an organization, or only allow a user to create one organization before they have to actually pay and get a subscription. So the Stripe plugin lets you do that. They also have the Polar plugin. I've never used Polar for payments. I've only used Stripe, but it works in a very similar way. And then this whole other list of all the other things you can do. So you can add two-factor authentication. So on the login page, you can make it so that a user has to type in their auth code from their auth app. There's also an API key plugin. So imagine this. You set up the Stripe integration, so now users are paying. And then let's say you want to give users API access to their list of buzzwords. Now you can use the API key plugin to create API keys for users, but maybe lock down how many API keys they can create, or lock down the number of remaining requests that a given API key can use based on the subscription that they paid for. So all of this remaining refill expiration is handled within the API key plugin. But just like the other plugins, they have hooks, they have custom functions. So within there, you could actually reach in to see, okay, what subscription do they have from Stripe? Okay, based on that subscription, they're going to get this number of API requests per month. Or maybe you even lock down rate limiting. So they have a built-in rate limiter for API keys. They also have a built-in rate limiter for the auth system itself, which I didn't show you. But whenever you create an API key, you can pass in custom rate limit options. And again, right before this, you could query your database to see, does the user have a subscription? If they do, set their rate limits accordingly. They also allow you to set up your Better Auth server as an OAuth provider for MCP clients. So you can basically make it so that your app allows users to log in, and then the MCP client can use that authentication token to call your API endpoints with the user that just logged in via that MCP login, and a million other things. They also have CAPTCHAs. Of course, you want to have CAPTCHAs on your site. Another thing is multi-session. So many sites don't allow you to do this, where basically be logged in with two different accounts at one time. They also give you open API documentation, which I didn't show. So you add this plugin, and then you instantly get some open API docs that show you all of the auth endpoints. So they've basically thought of everything. And then if they haven't thought of everything, you can customize things with the hooks like I talked about earlier, or just create a plugin. You can see there's some community plugins listed here, or just search around on GitHub to see what plugins people have created. But in my experience, it's done everything that I've needed it to do. And when I needed to customize it, I was able to do that without any headaches. And it really just gives you a full-fledged auth system that you're fully in control of. There's no monthly fees. You don't have to worry about like user limits. It absolutely lives up to the name. It is Better Auth. It's the best auth system I've used in all my years of working with backend JavaScript frameworks. All right, thank you so much for watching. That's it for this video. If you have tried Better Auth before, let me know about your experience down in the comments. Also, if you're going to try Better Auth based on this video, let me know as well. If you have any comments, questions, leave it down below, and I will see you in the next one.